of the show.
Sitting here in the Northern Hemisphere, in New York City, in winter time. The man we're about to talk to will soon be in the Southern Hemisphere, in the midst of our fierce summer in Australia. David Bowie.
Good evening.
How are you?
Incredibly well.
It's good to finally talk to you. And it's good also to know that you're going to be coming to Australia.
A very big welcome to Australia.
Yeah. So if we could launch into Heroes first up, about the recording and also the conceptualization of the songs. It more or less started with low and it seemed to have moved on into this album.
I'll give you a pivot point.
Yeah,
we start from Los Angeles,
okay.
1975, the late part of 1975. I'd got to an era where I'd been writing characters and narratives for maybe 5 years, something like that, and I was playing those characters, and every year or so I would have to change character for the next character. And change the environment, and it built up to a point where I had all these characters snowballing, and they were all becoming one character as far as the mass media was concerned in America. They couldn't relate to the fact that I was changing character every year or two, changing from Ziggy into Aladdin Sane and eventually to the Thin White Duke. And it affected me. And I was getting very disappointed in my writing. I thought I was getting too stylized. So I had to get back to Europe and formulate a new kind of writing for myself, and I needed somebody to bounce off for advice. So I phoned up Brian Eno, late of Roxy Music, who was one of the, probably one of the keenest brains in modern music in England. And so we got in touch and we found that we had a lot in common in the way of what we thought music should do and could do, apart from just be danced to or go and listen to. It could do all kinds of other things as well. And he laid on me all kinds of different processes and methods of writing. And we went into a studio in West Berlin, the antithesis, a completely different kind of city to Los Angeles, the reverse of what LA is all about. It's a very serious, earnest city. I've got to go to an island, so I made a compromise and found an island city where I was indeed surrounded by a sea of communism.
Sons of the silent age stand on platforms, blank books and notebooks.
Tell us about the stage show that is coming to Australia, at least a sneak preview. We've heard it's going to be pretty amazing.
Well, I don't know what you're expecting in Australia. One thing that you must know from the beginning is that you won't be seeing any characters on stage. There may be a time when I bring over some of the old shows to Australia, as it would be revivalism. I mean, it would be sort of very retrospective, put it in artsy terms. But
would you be doing any of the old material?
I'll be doing a lot of the old material on stage.
Already,
but what I want to do that may be quite new is that when I bring the show over to Australia, I'm working out a system where, because I want to, what I usually do with a stage show is reflect the album that I've done. That's why I do a stage show. So as these new albums, Low and Heroes, don't have any characters, I don't play a character in the albums. I have to reflect what they are, which is spontaneous experimentation. So what I've got to do is reflect that in the stage show, so that I'm working out a system where the audience contribute to the running order of the show.
That's
and I've got some very good ideas how it could be done and actually work. Well, they will decide the running pattern of the show en masse.
That will be an amazing sight to see.
So some of the shows will be dreadful, and some of them will be incredibly successful, depending on how the audience decide the show's going to run. That's one aspect of it.
Thank you for talking to us. We'd like to, if we could, when you get to Australia, have a bit more in depth with you.
I think that would be quite possible.
Beware the Savage Jaws of 1984, and Bowie talks about that album, Diamond Dogs.
It was a vision incorporating the kinds of ideas that Orwell had about big cities, that Fritz Lang had about big cities with Metropolis. I mean, it was a combination of the pessimistic attitude of what big city can become, that it was not natural on Earth to have big city. But
do you still believe in that 1984 concept?
I don't believe I mean, none of those things. Well, no, they were good statements. I mean, they were artistically, they were sort of valid about what I saw around me. I mean, I don't necessarily believe anything I write.
Some people have suggested to me that you may have been in relationship, especially to the man who fell to earth.
Yeah.
That there may have been a direct correlation between you being here and being in that movie. In other words,
what?
In other words, a lot of people tend to think that you may be an alien among us who has come down to deliver this futuristic message in music and show us the way.
No. Okay, let's put that right in perspective. That's a phenomenon of rock and roll. I mean, it would never have been thought of as that in any other art form. If what I was doing was I'd been doing it in painting, it would have been, yes, he's right on about what's happening.
Would have been accepted.
It just happens that it's rock and roll, unfortunately, as much as I love its roots, I don't necessarily like what it's playing at the moment. And this is David Bowie.
David Bowie on 2SM with the title track from the Young Americans album, and tonight we're working our way through the new album Heroes, which was recorded in West Berlin. Why West Berlin? David Bowie.
I wanted a city that would provide me with the friction that I was lacking in New York and Los Angeles, because I knew those cities too well, and if I know a city too well, I can't write in it.
Become bored with it.
No, I can't write in it.
Yeah.
I may like the city, but I can't write anymore. I can only write when I'm feeling in an uneasy position. Then I don't know the people or why they live or what they're doing every day, and then I can write. Because I observe, because I spend the first 2 or 3 months just looking at them, and that gives me new impetus. But when I start to know them, I don't look as much, so I don't write as well. So I move. And that's why I went to West Berlin, because it was such a strange, alien kind of city.
Had you been there?
Only one night gigs and stuff like that.
The melody to Heroes, which is, to me, really unique.
What I did, it was Brian's chord structure. Yeah. Brian had a particular chord structure he wanted to use, so all the musicians had the chord structure. We did no rehearsals. I said, these are the chords. This is how long each chord goes on for, how many bars these chords go on for. Play around those bars now. So that backing track is completely spontaneous around that musical premise, a foundation of chords, and they played exactly what they wanted to play over those chords without knowing what was going to happen. This is 2SM. Oh, and this is David Bowie. Just about every track on the last 2 albums has been approached very differently about how I was going to write it. Or if Brian was involved with me on the writing, it would be, we'd have very different processes, different methods of writing each track. How that one was written, Beauty and the Beast. There's a system of writing called cut-up, and it was developed by an author called William Burroughs. He introduced me to this style of writing, which has been apparent in modern writing for a number of years, but rock and roll still hasn't caught up with it. But I thought maybe I would try it, and I tried it on Diamond Dogs. Was the first time I started working with fragmented writing, cut-up technique. And what William would do, and what I've been doing, especially on Beauty and the Beast, is quite an interesting one to use, is that I would take a piece of paper, okay, and I'd write about 3 or 4 sentences around a character that I wanted to appear in that song. Then I would write another paragraph of 3 or 4 sentences about his environment. Then I'd write yet another one about a situation that was determined by the character and the environment. Then I'd write 2 or 3 lines about arbitrary statements. What the weather was like, what I had for lunch, it doesn't matter. But colorations that had nothing to do with the basic premise of the song. Then I'd cut them all up into lines with a pair of scissors, and then I cut the words into 3 or 4 word statements without paying much attention to where I was cutting. Then I would mix them up. Then I would pull out the statements and lay them in line so they became sentences. If some of the sentences were riveting, I would use them in the song. If some of the sentences gave me new ideas or new perspectives on that song, I would take it from that point. I would use that line and say, what a great idea from that line, and I would write again from that line. And so it goes on until you evolve something that you didn't start out with.
And to demonstrate that style of writing, from Heroes, this is Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast. Suffragette City and David Bowie from around the time of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Earlier, Bowie mentioned his ever-changing characters, Aladdin Sane, Ziggy and the Thin White Duke. As these characters changed, the media tended to confuse the image of the real David Bowie. Does he feel that the media turned him into something he didn't really want to be?
No, I mean, I can look back. I mean, you can't ignore your own scrapbook. It's what happened. I mean, even though I was defining different characters, they were being read by the press as one continuum of the same person.
Yeah.
So they built those characters up until it became a snowball of some incredible contradictory figure.
Yeah.
Which there came a point where I realised I couldn't separate the characters anymore because everybody had messed them all up. Which is fine, okay, that's how rock and roll works, all right. But it hadn't happened in rock and roll before, that one artist would take on different characters. And that was an innovation, and it was confusing for people.
Well, why do you do that? Why are you...
Because I was a painter.
Right? Yeah.
Because I was a painter, I was an old-fashioned painter, and I didn't like my paintings. I wasn't earning any money out of them. I couldn't, and I just didn't think they were very good anyway. So I thought I'd got to express myself a different way. If I go and get a conservative job, which I couldn't face getting. So I joined a mime company for 2.5 years. I was dabbling in poetry, sort of E.E. Cummings. I took the whole 60s reference period, you know, and I started writing very 60s style poetry and short stories and things. And I studied dance, I studied theatre.
Was that about the time you were recording things like The Laughing Gnome?
Yeah, all that period. Just ridiculous.
It was almost like a children's fantasy.
Yeah, but again, I felt incredible love it.
Said the Laughing Gnome.
It's a long way from the Laughing Gnome to Heroes. From that album, this is Joe the Lion. Joe the Lion and Bowie.